Hi, I'm Dr. Eddie Capparucci. I'm so honored to be part of this summit. And what I'm going to be presenting to you today over the next 25 minutes or so is about the wounds that our inner child take with him and impacts addiction, how the inner child impacts addiction. So the first couple slides, and you should have a copy of this PowerPoint to follow along. It gives you my credentials for my licenses, my years of practice, my certification. You can also see I'm the creator of the inner child model for the treatment of addictive behaviors. I'm the author of numerous books, and I also work not just with addiction behavior, but I've also worked with folks who deal with substance issues also. So let's look at our objectives for today. One, we're going to define what are the components of this inner child model that I created, and how can you apply them to addiction treatment. We're going to look at and understand how does the inner child impact addiction. We're going to learn how to differentiate between the 12 different inner child types, and I created 12 different inner children, to understand that each has its own unique and individual pain points that deal with past trauma or neglect. And finally, what are the steps necessary for successful implementation of this model in your practice? So let's start first with what is the inner child? Well, the inner child really is like a metaphor that represents an individual years, young years as a child, an adolescent, a teen, where he or she underwent some very major pain point, whether it was through trauma or neglect. And neglect not all just, oh, you know what, I wasn't fed, I didn't get proper medical care, whatever. It's a lot of what we're talking about here is emotional neglect. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But again, this is the inner child is like that storage unit. It's a warehouse that's subconscious within us that holds on to those pains. And the thing is, those pains that the child felt, they're still haunting us today. So when we look at doing inner child work, the objective is self-reflection. We want clients to start to ponder and think, and more importantly, we want them to answer why questions. Why do I think, feel, and act the way I do? And I believe this is so critical because when you have the answer to these questions, you're very empowered to be able to make substantial changes in your life, and not just make those changes, but to keep those changes intact as you continue to move forward. So for clinicians who do inner child work, there are certain things we want to look for. First and foremost is what are those hidden pain points? Because in many cases, a person has suppressed or repressed a lot of those memories. So therefore, we need to go and take a look to find out what are some of those pains that are still hurting us today. Again, what's the emotional drivers? What are those benefits, so-called benefits, of acting out in an addictive way? So we want to find out what that is. We want to answer the question, what are our clients running from and what are they running to? That's very important. This one, critical. All the noise. There is so much noise in a person who struggles with addiction in their head. It's pervasive negative self-talk, lies that they were told, that they were given when they were younger, whether directly or indirectly. We need to identify what those are and put them to truth so that therefore they can think and see themselves in a different way. And then finally, anxiety. We need to do an assessment to determine what is the anxiety level of our client, and then two, be able to show them different ways to be able to manage that anxiety. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. So all of that is done by understanding the inner child. And I believe there are three primary drivers that influence the development of our inner child. One is those unresolved pain points through either trauma or neglect, mostly emotional neglect. Two is that inability to process emotional discomfort. I have yet to meet anyone who deals with addiction who can sit with emotional discomfort, emotional distress. And why? Because they were never taught how to do so. So therefore, what they do is they come up with coping strategies that help them to escape that distress. And we'll talk more about that also. So right here. So a child experiences trauma and neglect. Okay. She's very hurt. There's no one there to comfort her, no one there to nurture her. There's no one there to explain. All right. She may go to the person and be told, look, you know what? It's not a big deal. I don't know why you're getting so upset. You know, it happens to everybody. Or, you know what? I don't have time to be bothered with this. So she goes through it by herself. So, but she can't sit with this. She has to figure out a way to obtain some sort of comfort. And the problem is she has very limited resources. She doesn't have a lot of worldly experiences that she can tap into to solve the problem. And two, she's more emotionally based in her thinking than she is cognitive. So what does she do? She developed a coping strategy to help her deal with this distress. And it is an amazing coping strategy for a child to come up with. I won't think about it. Let's see how this plays out. All right. We have a negative event that happens. There's no nurturing. We're sitting with this by ourselves. What am I going to do for emotional discomfort? Well, I won't think about it. Well, how do I not think about it? I distract myself. Too much food, too much sugar, too much television, too much fantasy, not sexual fantasy in my own head. They spend a lot of time in their own head, and that's why they can live in very elaborate fantasy world moving forward. Okay? And then the third element in the development of the inner child is what I mentioned before, that uncontrolled anxiety. Because the problem with this is that it leads to compulsive behavior. It increases our compulsiveness. And therefore, that's going to activate many neurotransmitters in the brain. When you have uncontrolled anxiety, what it does, it increases compulsiveness, and that increases poor decision making. So tell me you haven't seen this in your patients who deal with addictive behaviors. This is the core of the problem. How does the inner child influence? Okay, well, one, the child's locked in this time warp. He's back there suffering from, still sitting fearful, sad, troubled by things that have happened in the past. He's waiting to experience it again. He's activated by what I call core emotional triggers. Now, there are many types of triggers. There are visual triggers, there are environmental triggers, but I believe emotional triggers are the most damaging triggers that we can face. What this child does is he correlates a current negative event with something from the past. So when something happens to you and it's negative, or happens to one of our clients, the kid reaches into his storage unit and pulls it out and says, we've felt this before. Okay, and what it does, it intensifies the anxiety. He refuses to deal with any kind of distress. Okay, his only goal is comfort, and he came up with the solution for this, how to achieve that goal by, again, escaping, distracting himself. The other thing is this child's not going away. Those pains that we suffered from the past, they don't go away. They're there, but they can be minimized, okay, desensitized. And that's what we want to do with the inner child by convincing the child, look, you don't have to do this by yourself. What we're experiencing right now, you're not going to do this by yourself. I'm here, and I'm here to help you, and I'll guide through all of this. And so therefore, we learn to instruct and we learn to comfort. So basically, what we're talking about are hidden triggers. Okay, many of them that are, again, subconscious in us. And it's like the colliding of two worlds. But when the two worlds come together, they don't really kind of break up. Instead, what they do is they morph together and it becomes a bigger problem. And what that bigger issue is here is that's our anxiety. Okay, so we have anxiety coming from the past, anxiety coming from what's now happening. They come together, anxiety manifested. And what happens with anxiety? Increased compulsiveness, increased bad decision making. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of what that is. The inner child, again, brings in the past pain point into our current world, and our anxiety increases. We believe, okay, that it is based on the current event. That's why we think our anxiety is increasing, but it's not. It's also due to the past unresolved childhood pain points that we have. So now what happens as that anxiety continues to increase, and remember, we can't sit with this emotional discomfort, we've learned to distract and to run away. And we'll find a behavior that's either going to numb or it's going to stimulate us. So, for example, if there's a current event and it was maybe on a scale of 4 out of 10, all right? And that's where you are. But the inner child reaches into the storage unit, pulls something in, and now guess what? Your anxiety goes up to like a 9. Again, you don't know what the inner child's doing because it's subconscious. All right, we need to make it conscious to our client. They need to understand what's happening here. Okay, that it's not just what's going on in the moment, but there's other things from the past that are impacting them. Sometimes what I try to tell my client is, who else is in the room? Okay, you're having a disagreement or whatever with somebody. There's somebody else that might be in the room if things are really going bad. Okay, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's another figure who just caused problems in your world. We have to find out what that is because see, the kid is saying, we felt this before, and he wants to shut it down. That's what he's looking for. So with my model, what I've created were 12 inner child types. And these are the kids: the emotionally voided child, the early sexually stimulated or abused child, the mess child, the unwanted child, spiteful, the spiritually wounded, the need for control, the bored child, the weak inferior child, the unnoticed, the stressed child, and the unwanted child. These represent what I believe are the 12 major pain points that as children we go through and experience in our life. And these are similar pain points to what we'll also experience throughout our adult world also. So again, it's important for people, our clients, to understand that some of this past pain is influencing the way they're acting today. And by understanding and knowing that, they can separate the two worlds, put the past back here, or maybe even do work on the past so they can, put it in perspective, but then deal with the current circumstances based on only the facts alone. So what I'm going to do is very briefly, for the sake of time, run through each of these kids. In the book, Going Deeper, it really shows you how all of these kids, it gives you one chapter on each and every one of them, very in-depth. So let's look at the unaffirmed child, okay? The unaffirmed child grew up, receiving very little in the way of praise or criticism. And some might have received a lot of praise, okay? Maybe because of academic or athletic achievement. But then what happens is their peers catch up to them when they're in like middle school, and now they're not the smartest, they're not the most athletic, and now that praise, it just fades away. It's like the spotlight goes out, and they're screaming more for that spotlight. What all this does is it has a major impact on self-worth. Now, as an adult, they're very hypersensitive to criticism, and they may be very defensive and resentful. Or sometimes they like to fade into the background because, again, to be noticed means I'm going to get called out for something. Their desire is to feel valued. The bored child feels like they've never really been chased. Excuse me. They didn't really belong. Their parents sometimes were too distracted. All right. They didn't get a chance to pay much attention to them. And sometimes they're one of many children. So they just get kind of lost in the mix. So basically, they develop this sense, this worldview of no one really cares. Now, as an adult, they suffer chronic loneliness and often a very low grade, flat type of depression. They struggle to trust people. They are very hypersensitive to perceived rejection. So therefore, they may not be getting rejected, but they think they're getting rejected. And their desire is to feel alive. The unnoticed child feels like they never really belong. Nobody was ever chasing them. Their parents also were very distracted. So therefore, they may grow up in a family with many people, but again, they feel like they're just lost. Maybe this is like that middle child that it happens too often. Once again, feeling like no one really cared for them. And now, as an adult, little trust in people, hypersensitive to rejection, and they may suffer from a low grade depression also. Their desire is to be seen, right? We then move, and you can see the unnoticed and the unaffirmed are very similar in what happens. They're just the reason they've been developed is for a different cause. One because of criticism, the other because just not being noticed. The emotionally voided child, they struggle to emotionally connect. They receive the message that feelings really aren't important. They're not safe to share. And it's uncomfortable. They feel very uncomfortable in social settings and maybe family settings. As an adult, they have a very flat effect, very low key. They don't get high, they don't get very low. Connecting is about doing. I do things, and that's how I show you how much I care. And their desire, believe it or not, is to emotionally connect. They just don't know that. The lack of control child, they're raised in a very hectic environment and therefore sought control in their surroundings. The past proved that when things got out of control, they were the ones who got the consequences for it. So therefore, they came up with a worldview that if I have control, I can prevent bad things from happening. Erroneous, it doesn't happen, but that's what they think. As an adult, they have a very strong fear of the unknown. Remember, they're trying to put everything in order. But, that means what's coming? I don't know. And therefore, that causes a great deal of anxiety. You know, the feeling of lack of control, if they feel I can't control something, that's what's going to drive a lot of their addictive behavior. And their desire is stability. The spiteful child, okay, they were made to feel devalued as a child and a teenager. They felt like they didn't have a voice. Their needs didn't really matter. Their worldview, life is not fair. So therefore, what they do is they tap into taboo types of behaviors to say, see, I can do this and there's nothing you can do about it. Of course, they do it secretly, so nobody sees it. They're hypersensitive to being falsely accused. And they turn to these behaviors, again, as a reward. All right, I deserve this. That's the worldview that they're taking. And what they really desire, though, is to be treated fairly. The sexually stimulated or sexually abused child, again, at an early age, they were um, exposed to pornography or maybe someone having sex, parents or maybe older siblings, or they were sexually molested. It brought on many different types of emotions. Many hide, all right, many times they try to hide their anxiety and they don't really tell anyone what happened. Now, as an adult, they create very irrational beliefs sometimes about sex. Now, these are people who have never done anything to process the fact that they may have been abused. All right, let's keep that in mind. So, therefore, sex is a physical act, people are objects. They may be very promiscuous, they also may be very asexual. And their desire, of course, is to feel safe. The weak inferior child, they were conditioned to feel this way. And they probably had a lot of bullying that was going on, or they were negatively compared to other children. They lack confidence. They don't measure up as an adult. And they can be extremely reckless or they can be very cautious because I don't want to take a chance. Because if I take a chance and I fail, people will laugh at me, they'll mock me, or they're going to be reckless because they're going to say, I'm going to prove that I'm just as rough and tough as somebody else. Their desire is to feel empowered. The stressed child grew up in very stressful, anxious environment, but sometimes what happens is they can become desensitized to that anxiety and push it aside, again, suppress it, so therefore they don't even realize it exists. Others, on the other hand, they don't do that and they're just always anxious, always uncomfortable. So now that adult, they lack focus, they're easily distracted, and they struggle to make decisions, right? And once they make a decision, they may regret what they've done. The addiction, the addictive behavior, what it does is soothes that anxiety. And their desire, of course, is to relax. All right, we have a few more kids left. a mess. They grew up in a very smothering environment. They struggle to form their own identity. They lack boundaries with others. And as an adult, now they're unaware of usually what are their own emotions. They get caught up in everyone else's emotion. Again, they very indecisive. They feel very helpless at times. They struggle to self-soothe. It's hard to really calm themselves down. And they also struggle to say no. Their desire is to be oneself, to know who they are. Okay? The spiritually wounded child, they grew up in a religious environment, and they felt this enormous pressure sometimes to be very perfect, to be very righteous. They often felt very controlled, and sometimes they may have suffered abuse at the hands of a spiritual leader. Now, as an adult, they can lack a sense of purpose because they really don't know what is life about. What should I be doing here? They have a high level of fear and anxiety. And they may also have a potential loss of faith because they got this mixed message. They saw these are the rules, these are what we follow, and they're seeing other people who don't follow them. So there's a lot of confusion. So what is their desire? Their desire for clarity. Okay. The unwanted child, this is our last child. They experience a disconnection from parents or guardians, perhaps the depleted mother syndrome, mom who, you know what, this is her seventh child. She's tired, she's exhausted, or maybe there's a 8-year gap between one child and another, and she's not have the energy. And what she does, he just says, hey, you know what, this kid, I think he's very independent, she's very independent, she can handle things around. Young mothers who get married, who feel very overwhelmed with their circumstances. Parents who didn't want kids, there are some, but yet they get pregnant. And that sense of not really wanting kids comes through at times. Their emotional needs are not met here. And now as an adult, they often feel invisible. They understand or they feel that emotional neglect is part of a relationship, so therefore they may attract abusive partners. And their worldview is like, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me here? So, so let's talk quickly about how does the inner child activate? How is he activated by core emotional triggers? And this is a list of the various core emotional triggers. There are hundreds of them, but this just gives you a sense of it. So what's important is that the core emotional triggers are more important than the kids that are selected. Most clients have 4 to 6. They start with a much longer list, but we narrow it down and they have them memorize it. They memorize them, they bring them in every week and they talk about what were their triggers and how did they handle it. Okay. The goal is staying one step ahead of the child and the anxiety that that child manifests. So what's the process? Negative events occur, it could be multiple in one day. The inner child experiences emotional, you know, distraught. He's distraught. He reaches into a storage unit. He pulls something out that he believes is similar. It heightens the anxiety, and your client's often running to the addictive behavior. How can you tell the kid is activated? Well, here's a list of some of the things that are there. So again, clients can try to stay one step ahead of it. Now, how do you deal with the kid? One, we memorize what are those core emotional triggers. Again, there's like 4 to 6. We are mindful of negative events. We don't let them pile up on top of each other. We process the kid's pain, and then we take control by employing rational thinking, what I call the what I feel versus what is real method. And then finally, with that, we can make the right choice. Okay. And the what I feel, what versus what is real, that is the most important part because the client's no longer running on raw emotions when making decisions. They're using rational thinking. Okay. So this is the anchor of the inner child model, what I feel versus what is real. And this gives you a sense, this is the worksheet. So a client fills this out, what's the negative event? They put in what are their core emotional triggers. Then they write a bunch of feeling statements, okay, based on the event. You know, I feel embarrassed because my boss was upset with me that I messed up a job. I feel scared because I'm going to get fired. And you just write down as many as you could think of. Then we take all those statements, okay, these are all the raw emotions that we just ran on. And what we're going to try not to run on these things. And we move them over to what is real. Now, at this point, what you have to do, a client has to throw out everything that's an assumption. I'm going to get fired because I'm afraid I'm going to get fired because my boss is upset. That's an assumption. You don't know that's going to happen. You got to get rid of assumption. You have to get rid of lies that you tell yourself. I can't do anything right. Got to throw that out. So we're taking this list and we're starting to throw things out. You have to throw out everything that's a fear. So again, everything that's an assumption, everything that's a lie, everything is a fear. You throw them out. And what we do is we take this list of feeling statements and we bring it down to what is real. Okay. And this you can manage. This you can't manage. It's too much. This you can manage. And that's what we're trying to get clients to do, to manage. But there is more, and that's being drained. If we're drained mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, bad things happen. Therefore, we have to work every day to make sure that is not the case, that we're staying ahead of that with it. All right. What are some of the pitfalls? Clients over 70 have more of a difficult time understanding, grasping the inner child concept. Some clients have a problem with lack of memories from their childhood. Some have a problem being able to share their emotions. All these things can be overcome, right? Some of them feel guilty about looking at their parents. They feel like, I can't blame my parents. We're not looking to blame parents. We might be looking to hold them accountable. We're not looking to blame. And they also think, oh, I got a perfect childhood. Well, they had a perfect childhood in many cases because the parent did things with them, but there was no emotional aspect happening. They come to you with the crisis of the moment to put off doing some of this work. And then we also have clients who struggle to read, and that's part of the problem too, that we have it. Just for you to know, you can contact me, and I'm sorry I ran through this so quickly, but usually it takes me an hour and a half to give this presentation, but this is some of the going deeper books that we have. You can contact me at innerchildmodel@gmail.com if you have any questions. And if you're interested in a certification program, we have one at purelifeacademy.org/bundle/ICTC. And you can find out more information about that, where you can get certified in this program. It is a go at your own pace. It's a 7-part video series that I narrate and walking you through and showing you all the different forms and things that we use. So it may be something that you're interested in. But then again, reach out to me at Inner Child Model and let me know if you have any kind of questions and such, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. Thanks very much for your time. God bless you.